My name is Mike Morrice. I'm the Member of Parliament for Kitchener Centre with the Greens. Yes, I made the decision in 2018 at a time when the governing party had chosen to buy a pipeline. And I've read the most recent report from climate scientists that were telling us we have this closing window of opportunity to take action on the climate crisis. And it just felt like there was nothing else more important than putting my time and energy towards trying to have an impact at the federal level on climate policy. And then as I started to knock on doors, really found how wide the number of issues are that folks in my community were raising, and really wanted to try to be a voice for those issues. But it really just felt like a real sense of calling at the time, which I think was important, because as anything, there was various challenges along the way. And I think with that sense of calling, it allows a person to kind of push through when things get hard at different moments along the way. Yeah, so as an MP, I've been at it for only about a year and a half or so now, but one significant campaign that I'm really proud of being a part of since being elected is responding to calls from disability advocates across the country who have been calling for many years for a guaranteed income for people with disabilities. We could reduce poverty by 40% if we lifted people with disabilities out of poverty who are disproportionately living in legislated poverty across the country. And having taken cues from disability advocates across the country, their calls for a guaranteed income, it had been promised by the governing party. It had been promised as the Canada Disability Benefit. We were able to work across party lines. Over 100 MPs called on the governing party to introduce legislation for the disability benefit. That then happened. At committee, was able to get amendments passed to improve the bill. For example, ensuring that it's indexed to inflation. And now I'm continuing to work to see it moved through the Senate, and most importantly, funded, so that people with disabilities will be lifted out of poverty through this. And I think it's an example of where Parliament can work together, and that when MPs choose to put the interests of their communities first, who wouldn't agree that people with disabilities should be lifted out of poverty, and that their voices should be listened to as we develop the regulations to do it. What a privilege to get to have a seat amongst 337 other colleagues who are speaking for the voices of their communities. And so I guess thinking about neighbors of mine and conversations we've had, knocking on door after door and hearing their calls, whether it's around, if I think about a mom I spoke to just a week ago and in tears about the lack of mental health supports for her daughter, or whether I think about members from our community who are reeling from the recent earthquake in Turkey and Syria, and recognizing that I have the opportunity to bring their voices to the House of Commons, to have their voices heard in federal legislation. It's more than just get myself out of bed in the morning. It's just an incredible privilege to get to be here, and a responsibility, because I'm taking up space. And I feel it's really important that in doing so, I'm doing that in a way that is best, I guess, doing as much good as I can for as long as I can in this space. I guess since being elected, I have a front row seat to some of the theatrics that can take place in the House of Commons, and I have a deeper appreciation for separating some of the theatrics and when someone is trying to raise money amongst a group of donors and those that are actually seeking to improve the lives of members of their community, and separating some of the, I would call it toxic partisanship that is a part of of life in Ottawa from the really critical work that can be done across party lines to improve the lives of people in communities across the country. And I feel like I'm learning every day a bit more about how to separate those two and how to make progress with other MPs who are really focused on getting things done for their neighbors and for the priorities that they hold. Working across party lines to get things done is a significant part of the mandate I feel like I have from my community, and it's for me it's just how I operate, and it's a big part of why I chose to run as a Green in the first place. And so I mentioned earlier I've been working really hard on moving ahead and putting pressure on the governing party to introduce the Canada Disability Benefit. Well, that was over 100 MPs from every single party who joined us in that call, and that was a lot of fun to be working with them, to do it respectfully, to say this is important to all of us in all of our communities, and along with 43 senators who wrote a similar letter, we put out an open letter together to help to make that call. And I'm really proud of that effort. And, the small impact it had alongside, disability advocates across the country and the work of the Senate and so many others that we're helping to call for fast-tracking that really important legislation. One of the challenges I see is just the reality of how partisanship can create a deeply adversarial dynamic when that's not necessary. And it's everything from the way that the House of Commons is set up, that MPs directly face off across each other, to some of the words. You've got party whips. I guess that means they whip their MPs to all vote the same way, or critics. All of this language, it's all a construct to help to put forward that adversarial dynamic. And I don't think, or it's certainly not what neighbors of mine in Kitchener are wanting me to focus on. And I expect it's not the case for most Canadians across the country who likely want to see their elected representatives find a way to find common ground and make progress on those things. In terms of reducing that partisanship, I think the most helpful thing would be to get rid of this winner-take-all, first past the post way we have of electing people. We could follow the lead of many other Western democracies around the world that have adopted proportional representation, which by its nature would get a better diversity of people elected, would lead towards more collaboration amongst those who are elected, and would actually incentivize those things. I think it's not a coincidence that we have an underrepresentation of women in the House of Commons, of racialized people in the House of Commons, Black, Indigenous, and racialized. And with proportional representation in other legislatures around the world, that's not always the case. And so I think it's a call that we need to continue to put pressure on to, I guess the simple way to put it, every vote should count. And we should all continue to push for that, for a more collaborative approach to our politics. The word hope to me is more of an action. And so when I see the way that young people across the country are standing up, and whether it's standing up for disability justice or standing up for climate action, or it's standing up to call out anti-Black racism across the country, when I see their fierce advocacy on any number of these issues, I'm inspired by that. I feel compelled to amplify those calls, and I recognize that they've got a longer horizon when it comes to the climate crisis. Decisions that are being made by elected leaders today are going to affect them more than anyone else. And so I guess it's seeing how they are taking action and pushing for better from their elected representatives, and seeing those elected representatives be compelled to act as a result. Probably to take care of yourself. I don't think we talk enough about how whatever someone is hoping to do with their life, that a person, in my view, is only in a good place to make the world around them better if they're in good relationship with themselves, with their family and their closest friends. I think then that person's in a better place to have a good impact on the world around them. And I think and I remind myself of this to this day, if I'm honest with you. This is advice that I think is something I need to continue to remind myself, that by getting a good night's sleep, by eating well, by going for a run, whatever the case is that is taking care of myself, that's not selfish. That taking care of myself is actually a part of my interest in bettering the world around me.